There's seriously nothing cooler than black cowboys. Big facts. Black cowboys have always been around.
It's so true. Check this out. That was Lethal Lex. She's an amazing person and the actual founder of the BLM Utah chapter. Go check her out. Now, when a person sees a black cowboy and they think that idea doesn't make sense because all we've ever seen are white cowboys, you would be 100% factually wrong. The very first cowboys were black, beginning with the actual term. White men who worked a ranch were called cowhands. Black men who worked a ranch were called cowboys. Yes, the actual term is stooped in racism. When you're seeing a John Wayne or a Clint Eastwood, what you're actually seeing is a very poor imitation of a famous black cowboy. His name was Nat Love, better known as Deadwood Dick, who was ridiculously talented in all things cowboy. From Bill Pickett, who invented the sport of bulldogging. Bass Reeves, who was the actual real Lone Ranger. Hannah July, who was so talented at taming wild horses, the U.S. Army actually hired her. There is no such thing as a cowboy as we know it without black people. Black history is American history, plain and simple. Actually hired her. There is no such thing as a cowboy as we know it without black people. Black history is American history, plain and simple.
Everything you learned in history class is a lie. And I want to show you why. When you think back to history class, what do you really remember? They told us all kinds of stories about Columbus and the Mayflower and the Indians. They told us about Boston Tea Party and everything else, even the Civil War, but did they really tell us everything? How about the aether, the free energy of the atmosphere? How about the giants that used to exist on this earth? What about this mud flood event? This catastrophic flood that seems to have buried much of our world? Did they teach you about the millions of mounds found all across North America? And did they teach you about the pyramids that they also found all across the Americas? How about the mummies they found in the Grand Canyon? There's an article from the 1800s I posted before that says Columbus came to the Americas in 1492 to seek the Grand Khan of Tartary. Did they teach you about Tartary? Did they show you that on the maps of Tartary there's actually names of cities? Did you get to read any of the books on aether written in the 1800s? Or they were made obsolete? Many people say they were still taught that the earth was flat, even as late as the 1930s and 40s in the schools. The history that's being taught nowadays leaves out a lot of details. And when you look at the old world, and you see all these dates starting in J and I, maybe our timeline is not what it seems. Maybe we're living in a different year than we've been told. As always, thanks for watching.
From a group of French colonists that came to the United States before it was the U.S. This was right after Columbus. He said that it was the first colony of French folks that came over to try to establish a colony on the coast. And he said they landed in Jekyl Island, and they had some interaction with these Indians. And then they got so appalled by what they saw and witnessed that they fled at night and ended up in San Augustine, Florida, and established that city. So I said, were they the Huguenots who were the French group that established San Augustine? He said, yes. I said, well, I'd like to see that painting. So he pulls that out. I'm looking at it. And it shows the Indians and all their regalia, and they're dancing around and having some kind of a ceremony, and it's got the fire, and it's a typical, either they're having a party or they're having a war scene, and it has some things with weapons. So I said, gosh, this has got some weapons in it that clearly validates the archaeology that they found. And then I see an altar. And I'm going, I don't know of a Native American tribe anywhere in the country. I know some that had log houses or high places or worshipped, nature in some way, or had totem poles or that kind of stuff. But this one has a stone altar, and it looks a whole lot like the one that I had dealt with in the Middle East. And I'm looking at the picture, and I'm going, is this an altar? Is this stone like something they're sacrificing on? Because this guy's holding babies in his hands in this picture. He said, yeah, they're cutting those babies, they're hacking those babies up in that painting. So when you look at the details, two of the shamans or chiefs are holding a baby up by the ankles, and they're whacking their heads off and spilling the blood on this altar. And I'm like, sir, I don't want to be disrespectful of your training and archaeological understanding and history, but I don't know of any native tribe that did what I'm seeing here unless it was an act of war. And this is really, really unusual. And I've seen this type of scene with artifacts over in the Middle East. And I've seen weapons like this over in the Middle East. I said, are you sure this is Native Americans and not some kind of colony that came from over there? And he was convinced they were native, and I said, well, I'd like to show you some things on a few websites that identify artifacts in the Middle East countries, and especially Egypt and Israel and Syria and Jordan area, and some of those spots where there's some of these ancient groups. And I said, this type of altar, this type of religious ceremony, and some of these weapons, I've seen them before over there.
Told you that the year might actually be 1724. In the 1990s, several German historians proposed a radical idea that the Middle Ages in fact didn't exist and we are actually living in the 18th century. In 1582, the Pope introduced the Gregorian calendar. Prior to this, most of the world was using the Julian calendar. The Julian calendar had a leap year every 4 years, in which an extra day was added. Since the solar year is technically a little over 365 days, the Julian calendar gains a day every 128 years. To account for this, when the Gregorian calendar was introduced, they should have shifted the date by 13 days. So here we have two possibilities. A pope had done the math wrong, 300 years in between then and now don't actually exist, and large chunks of history have been fabricated. But the phantom time hypothesis points out that it's way more than just a pope making a simple mistake. It points out the lack of records of big events.